The house of Jerry Springer, an iconic TV personality, had always been a subject of curiosity. Nestled in a quiet suburb of Cincinnati, it was an ordinary home, from the outside at least. But after Jerry's passing in April 2023, it became more than just a celebrity residence. A sense of unease lingered in the air, almost as if the very walls of the house carried the weight of its former owner's larger-than-life persona. The new owners, a young couple named Olivia and Mark, had been looking for a home in Cincinnati for months. They were drawn to the area for its peaceful streets and proximity to Mark's new job at a local tech startup. When they saw the house on the market, they were excited despite hearing rumors about its past. The house itself was not enormous, but it exuded charm, with a large backyard, a modest pool, and enough space for a growing family. It seemed like the perfect place for them to settle into the next chapter of their lives. Olivia, who had grown up in a more modern house, was taken by the old-world charm the house seemed to offer. The hardwood floors creaked with character, and the vintage wallpaper, though worn, added a quirky vibe. Mark, on the other hand, was more skeptical. He had heard about Jerry Springer's extravagant persona and the chaos that surrounded his show, The Jerry Springer Show. But he pushed his doubts aside. After all, it was just a house, right? From the first night, however, they began to notice something wasn't quite right. It started with small things. A light flickering in the hallway late at night, faint sounds echoing from upstairs when no one was there. Mark shrugged it off as the quirks of an old house, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. It wasn't until the third week that things began to escalate. Olivia was in the kitchen, preparing dinner when she heard what sounded like a heated argument coming from the living room. She rushed in, only to find the room completely empty. Mark had been in the basement, and no one else was around. That night, after a particularly unsettling experience with the kitchen lights flashing on and off for several minutes, the couple decided to do a little research. What they uncovered about the house was enough to send chills down their spines. The house had been where Jerry Springer lived for many years, and the more they dug, the more bizarre stories they found. Locals whispered that the house had been the scene of countless arguments, loud parties, and unsettling behavior that had somehow seeped into its very foundation. Friends and colleagues of Jerry's spoke about his energetic and, at times, chaotic personality. Some said his energy never fully left the place. Some even said they felt his presence when visiting after his death, a strange mix of humor and anger, as though his spirit were still holding court. The couple decided to talk to the previous owners, who had lived in the house before Jerry. They were older now, but their stories were strikingly similar to the experiences Olivia and Mark were having. They recalled how doors would slam for no reason, footsteps echoed down the hall at night, and sometimes, in the middle of the night, they could hear laughter loud and manic coming from the living room, even though no one was there. They never truly believed it was a haunting, but they couldn't explain the eerie occurrences either. The tension in the house only seemed to grow as the weeks went by. Olivia began experiencing vivid dreams of Jerry himself, sitting in his iconic chair, grinning as though ready to start a fight. Mark, who had been trying to stay logical about the whole thing, started to feel the weight of it all too. One night, after coming back from a late meeting, he was sitting on the couch when the TV clicked on by itself. The screen flashed to a replay of an old episode of The Jerry Springer Show, featuring an argument between two guests. The odd thing was, the show had been canceled years ago, and Mark had never watched it before. The guests, however, were wearing the same outfits as the figures he had seen in his dreams. The couple soon found themselves unable to sleep. The sense of being watched grew stronger, as though Jerry Springer's spirit, his loud, confrontational energy, was forever embedded in the walls. It was as if his presence lingered, demanding attention, reminding them of the chaos that had once filled the house. Even though they tried to make it their home, the house didn't feel like theirs. In the weeks that followed, they contacted a local paranormal investigator, hoping to make sense of the disturbances. The investigator confirmed their suspicions. The house had an unusual level of residual energy, tied to Jerry's turbulent life and larger-than-life personality. Whether or not his spirit remained was debatable, but the investigator believed the intense energy Jerry had brought to the house had left a lingering imprint, one that would not easily fade. In the end, Olivia and Mark, exhausted and on edge, put the house back on the market. They couldn't explain what they had felt, but they knew they needed to move on. The house, for them, was a reminder of something unsettling, a reminder that not all places are meant to be lived in, no matter how much history they hold. And so, Jerry Springer's house stood there, waiting for the next owners, with its past still echoing through the hallways. Weeks passed, but Olivia and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were trapped in a nightmare they could never quite wake up from. Their attempts to reach out to real estate agents were met with hesitations and nervous looks. It seemed the house had a reputation beyond what they had realized when they first purchased it, and that reputation was starting to spread. Neighbors, who had been friendly and welcoming at first, now avoided them. The couple would often find themselves staring at the empty streets late at night, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows down their quiet suburban block. The unsettling energy that had once been confined to the house seemed to follow them, seeping into the air around them as well. One evening, after a particularly draining day, Olivia sat alone in the living room. She had been trying to ignore the lingering unease that had settled in her chest, but it was impossible. The house was quiet, too quiet. Mark had been gone for the evening, meeting with a colleague, and she was left to her thoughts. As she gazed out the window into the dimming twilight, she couldn't help but feel a strange heaviness, as if the house itself was pressing in on her. Her fingers rested on the arm of the couch, cold to the touch, and it felt as though they were being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the house itself had exhaled. The faint smell of cigar smoke lingered, a scent she had noticed occasionally but never connected to anything in particular. Jerry Springer had been a heavy smoker, and though the house had been cleaned, some smells refused to vanish. But tonight, the scent felt different, sharper, more pungent. She stood up, unable to ignore the rising tide of unease in her chest. Every step she took seemed to echo in the hollow silence of the house, and the wooden floors creaked beneath her feet, louder than usual. She paused as she reached the kitchen, her eyes drawn to the dark hallway stretching toward the staircase. A sliver of light from the street lamp outside filtered in through the curtains, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. A door slammed upstairs. The sound was sudden, violent, and unmistakable. It wasn't the wind, not this time. The house seemed to groan in response, as though it had awoken, disturbed from some deep slumber. Her heart pounded in her chest, a sharp reminder that she was no longer in control of the situation. She knew she should call Mark, ask him to come home, but something held her back. The silence that followed the slam was more oppressive than the noise itself, a silence thick with expectation. Olivia took a hesitant step forward, then another. She was drawn to the stairs as though something was pulling her there, beckoning her to witness whatever had triggered the disturbance. The hall seemed longer now, almost as if it had stretched, and the shadows seemed to press in from all sides. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to turn back. But she couldn't. She had to know. With each step she ascended, the air grew colder, a sharp chill that gnawed at her skin. The landing at the top of the stairs was dark, and Olivia found herself feeling for the light switch, her fingers trembling as she finally found it. The dim light that flickered to life revealed the hallway narrow, lined with closed doors that all seemed to lead into rooms where memories lingered like forgotten echoes. She turned toward the room at the end, the one that had once been Jerry's study, though it no longer held any trace of his presence. The door creaked open with the same eerie groan that the house had become known for. Inside, the room was empty, but it felt suffocating. There was an overwhelming sense of being watched, of unseen eyes following her every movement. She took another step inside, the floorboards protesting under her weight. On the desk, which was now bare save for a few pieces of old paper and a cracked lamp, there was something that hadn't been there before. A small, wooden box, old and worn, sat in the middle of the desk, its surface scratched and scarred, as if it had been handled many times. She hadn't seen it earlier when she and Mark had toured the house, and yet here it was, as if it had always been waiting for her. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the box. It felt wrong, like opening it would awaken something buried deep within the house, something that should never be disturbed. But curiosity, that insidious force, got the better of her. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside, there was nothing but a single photograph, black and white, depicting a scene from Jerry's infamous show, a fight between two guests. The image was frozen in time, but the expressions on the faces of the people in the photo were distorted, their features warped in a way that seemed unnatural. It was as if the picture itself had captured the raw chaos and rage of the moment, turning it into something far darker than a mere photograph. Olivia gasped, dropping the box onto the desk. Her pulse quickened, and she stumbled back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The house felt different now, more oppressive, more alive. The shadows deepened, and the temperature in the room dropped drastically. She turned and fled from the room, her feet barely touching the ground as she raced back down the stairs, the sound of her panicked breathing the only thing she could hear. She reached the living room, but the house was no longer silent. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed from above. She froze, eyes wide in terror, as the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping across the floor reached her ears. Then, laughter. It was Jerry's laughter, wild, manic, and echoing through the walls. Mark had barely arrived home when Olivia rushed to him, her eyes wide with fear. She explained everything: the box, the photo, the laughter, but as she spoke, she realized something even more chilling. Mark hadn't heard a thing. He hadn't seen the box, and he certainly hadn't felt the presence that seemed to pulse through the house. As the night wore on, Olivia wondered if she was losing her mind, or if there was something far more sinister happening. The house, she realized, had already begun to reclaim them. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The night stretched on in a haze of uncertainty, the heavy atmosphere of the house pressing in on Olivia and Mark as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. Mark, although skeptical at first, couldn't deny the fear that lingered in Olivia's eyes. He had seen her scared before, but this was different. This wasn't the type of fear that could be explained away by a bad dream or an overactive imagination. It was real, palpable. He felt it too, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet. His thoughts whirled as he sat down on the couch, his fingers brushing against the armrest absent-mindedly. Every sound seemed amplified, every creak of the floorboards sending a jolt through his body. Olivia paced the living room, her eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. It felt as though the house had become a living entity, breathing in time with their own labored exhalations. The walls seemed to close in, as if the house was shrinking around them. The very air was thick, heavy with something they couldn't name but both sensed, an oppressive weight that threatened to crush them. As Olivia moved, she caught sight of a reflection in the window, the faint outline of a figure standing just behind her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she spun around, but the figure was gone, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her pulse raced, and she glanced at Mark, who was still staring at the floor, lost in thought. "See what?" Mark replied, his voice strained. His eyes met hers, but there was something distant in them, a growing wariness. "The figure," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "There was someone standing behind me, right there in the reflection." Mark stood up, a bit too quickly, his hand instinctively brushing his forehead. He felt the cold sweat there, and suddenly the house felt even colder. He turned, looking around the room as though the answer would reveal itself in the corners of the dim light. "Olivia, you're just stressed. This place, it's old, and the night makes things seem worse than they are. You've been hearing things, seeing things." But Olivia shook her head, stepping closer to him, her eyes wide with panic. "No, Mark, this isn't just stress. There's something wrong with this house. I can feel it. I think we're not alone here. I think it's Jerry. I think—" "Don't." Mark's voice was firm, cutting through her words. He didn't want to believe it. Not yet. His mind raced, trying to hold on to some semblance of logic. "We're going to be okay. Let's just go to bed, try to get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure this out. We'll leave if we have to, But right now I need you to calm down. This isn't him. It's just—" A loud crash interrupted him, the sound coming from upstairs. The unmistakable noise of glass shattering. Without thinking, Mark grabbed Olivia's hand and pulled her toward the stairs. "That's not normal," he muttered under his breath. But there was an edge to his tone now, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. The house, it seemed, had begun to twist their perceptions, filling them with doubt and dread, warping their understanding of reality. They reached the top of the stairs, and the corridor was unnaturally still. The house felt suspended in time, like a place caught between worlds. The faint smell of smoke was stronger here, almost stifling, and the distant echo of that manic laughter seemed to linger, reverberating in the silence. Olivia could feel the hairs on her neck stand on end, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But they pressed forward, their feet dragging as if something were holding them back. The sound of their breathing, shallow and quick, was the only thing that filled the air. As they reached the end of the hallway, they saw it. The room that had once been Jerry Springer's study was wide open, the door hanging at an odd angle, as though someone had forced their way inside. But there was no one there, just the room, empty and waiting. The light from the hallway cast long shadows, stretching across the walls. On the desk, the wooden box sat again, exactly where it had been earlier. But now the lid was open. Inside, the photograph was gone. In its place was something far more disturbing, an old, tattered notebook, the pages yellowed with age. Olivia's heart thudded painfully in her chest, a cold sweat breaking out across her skin. Mark reached for it before she could stop him, his fingers brushing against the brittle paper as he lifted it from the desk. The moment his hand touched the notebook, the temperature in the room plummeted. Olivia felt it, an icy chill that sank deep into her bones. The air felt dense, almost suffocating, as if the house were inhaling, drawing them deeper into its grip. Mark flipped open the notebook, his eyes scanning the pages. At first, they were filled with nothing but scribbled words, incoherent ramblings that made no sense. But as he turned further, he began to read aloud, his voice shaky, the words stumbling out like a chant, a spell that he couldn't stop. "They don't know what they've done. They came to me. They all came to me. The house knows. It always knows. I can't leave. I can't escape." The words were nonsensical at first, but then, as Mark read more, they began to form a disturbing pattern. There were references to Jerry's show, to the chaos that had defined his career, the fights, the drama, the constant noise that seemed to surround him. But there was something darker underneath it all, a sense of regret, a hint of fear. And then, towards the end of the notebook, the handwriting changed. It became jagged, erratic. The sentences twisted in a way that made no sense, and at the very last page, one phrase stood out, repeated over and over again. "I'm still here." The moment Mark finished reading, the temperature in the room dropped even further, and Olivia felt a jolt of terror shoot through her. The floor beneath her feet vibrated, a deep hum reverberating through the walls. It was the house. It was alive, and it had been waiting. Suddenly, the lights flickered once more, and for a brief moment, Olivia saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was Jerry Springer, his face twisted into that infamous grin, his eyes wild with madness. His body was hazy, flickering like a shadow caught in the light. He wasn't solid, not really, but his presence was undeniable. He looked at her, and then he spoke, his voice low and mocking, though no words came from his mouth. It was the laughter that followed that made her blood run cold, loud, echoing, and impossibly close. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. But the laughter lingered, echoing through the house, filling every corner, every room. Olivia looked at Mark, but he was frozen, his eyes wide, staring at the spot where the figure had been. His face was pale, his lips moving, but no sound came out. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. The house, they realized, was not just haunted by memories of Jerry Springer. It was haunted by him, by his spirit, by the chaos he had created, his presence now as real as the walls that surrounded them. And just like the show he had once hosted, the house had become a stage for a twisted spectacle that they couldn't escape. And they knew, deep down, that no matter what they did, they would never truly leave. The days that followed were a blur of fear and desperation. Mark and Olivia tried everything, talking to paranormal experts, seeking advice from religious figures, but nothing worked. The house, and Jerry's presence within it, seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. They could feel the walls closing in, suffocating them with memories of chaos and conflict, the lingering echoes of a life lived in constant drama. Eventually, they couldn't take it anymore. The house had become too much, too oppressive, and the presence of Jerry Springer was too real. One night, after hearing the familiar sound of his manic laughter echoing down the hall one last time, they packed what little they could carry and fled. They left behind the house, the memories, and the dark force that seemed to cling to every surface. The house, however, remained, its walls still breathing, its halls still haunted by the spirit of the man who had once filled the air with noise and conflict. And in the silence that followed, Jerry Springer's laughter echoed, waiting for the next owners to come and feel the same weight, the same eerie presence that would never truly leave. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.